Nelson. I'm glad you're here today for my tutorial. I'm also known as Katie the Creative Lady, and you can find me at katiethecreativelady.com. And I also have several other videos here on YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about text size and font choices for scrapbook layouts. This is a really important part of scrapbooking and will make a big difference on how your layouts look and how much you can enjoy them. I'm going to be using my Ruby Reds collection today. This is part of my Color Story series, and I just want to walk you through it real quick. There are pocket cards. There are always 24 cards in my collections. I do 12 in the size of 3x4 and 12 in the size of 6x4 to give you lots of options. These are great on pocket pages and traditional layouts. I even like to use them to print out little notes or make greeting cards. The filler cards are just what they say. You can fill your different spaces on your layouts and add some personality and detail. Red is one of my very favorite colors, and it brought up so many fun ideas and memories for me when I got looking at red. Of course, I'm a big Friends fan, and of course, if you watch Friends, you will understand the reference to "You're my lobster." That means that somebody is meant to be together with you. The red rule, if you've never heard of that, it's something that photographers talk about, and the red rule is that when you see red, you should photograph it. When you see something really bold and beautiful like red, that's a cue to get out your camera and take a picture. There are a lot of different themes that go with the color of red. Sort of country or rural can be something when you think about barns or westerns. Of course, hearts and love, all of those things are brought up with the color of red. But I wanted to make this a kit that would work for any time of year and any theme. There's no place like home. Those ruby red slippers, how iconic are those? And you're one in a melon, you're the cherry on top. A lot of food was brought to mind with red. Lots of yummy, juicy things there. The journaling cards are always a great chance to include your story in the layout. And those cute little ladybugs were done as a digital watercolor by my daughter Riley, who works with me on several of these projects. And her business name is The Creative Coop. So sometimes when you're looking through the files, if you see one that has TCC in the file name, you'll know that the Creative Coop was behind that design. Filler cards again in the 6x4, and just those same wonderful designs in a different format. The journaling cards again. And the paper pack, I just think papers might be my very favorite thing to design. I love them so much, and they're great for all sorts of digital projects. You can print them out if you're a hybrid scrapper. And the wonderful thing about digital paper supplies and stashes is that you never run out. You can use them over and over on lots of different layouts and get different looks each time. I have to show off the papers, this fun bandana print, and the cute sort of larger gingham check to feel like a picnic. The red, dark redwood barn, and those cute little ladybugs again. A watermelon seed paper, and sort of a hash stripe, little ticking stripe is probably the word I'm looking for. But I love that with the red and white. Ruby red glitter paper for your fancy pages and to go with those ruby slippers. Really cute to fill lettering with that paper and get a glamorous look. Also sort of a woven red paper. I love that. It's sort of a batik type print. Dark red floral and yummy cherries. Those birds are just so sweet. I love birds, and red birds are just a favorite. I always enjoy using a solid paper that has a fun edge detail. It really looks great on a layout and adds a little bit of character to your page. The template set on this one's a little different than the ones I usually do. It has outlined text boxes instead of the pocket cards for the journaling. And I think you'll really enjoy using these, and that works so well for this tutorial where I'm showing off how to make your text really shine. I love templates because they take the guesswork out of layouts. I've done all the measuring and all of the fussing over the details for you, and now you can just open up the file and plug and play. Just put in your photos, put in your words, and it's done. They're already shadowed. They're already laid out for you. They can be used over and over, and I include both single page and double page templates. The stamps and brushes going along with this set are very useful. There's a couple of them that might seem a little different to you because they are meant to go on a journaling space, like a journaling card, and they give you sort of a transparent looking bar and then some lines. So if you go back and you're looking at the cards in this kit, we'll just do a little rewind here. You can see this dark red card is where I got that stamp from. And you can make your own cards and your own journaling designs with that. Stamps are so versatile and so useful. You can really be creative with them. You can stamp that lobster and color him in if you would like, or leave him as an outline. And lots of opportunities for creativity here. Let's get right down to the font choices and the font sizes for a layout. The very most important thing is to make it readable. There are all the fancy fonts in the world, but if you can't read it, it's not worth it. And it's really easy to become a font hoarder and to get so excited about having every font in the world. But I have found that I really like to narrow down my choices when it comes to the text that I want to have a long block of text and make it easy to read. And I'm going to show you some examples. It's also okay to want your font to match the mood. Fonts are a design choice. And if your page is more playful or young with children, you may want to use more of a handwriting type of font. If it's something that is a very clean design, you'll want a very clean looking font. And I get a little more fancy with my fonts once I start working on titles or adding a few strips of journaling here or there. The size really does matter on fonts, and we're going to talk about that too. And when you are mixing your fonts, you're going to want to be moderate about it. You don't want to put, 4 or 5 different kinds of fonts on a page. I think the best rule is to keep one font for your journaling and then choose another 1 or 2 to work into some title work. And I have some preview tricks that I use to help you figure out text size. So stay tuned to the end to see those, and we're going to go through these tips really quick. Okay, this is the template that I'm going to use to start with. This is one of the ones from this set, and it's a really good way to show you some of these ideas. All right, we're going to open it up in Photoshop Elements. You can see on all my layers, I have a couple of different journaling layers, and I've labeled them whether it's the top row or the middle or the bottom. Now, when you highlight that, you can see what font I used, what the size is. Now, if you don't have that font installed, it may default to another font that you have installed. Once you highlight the text that I've put in there, you can start typing your own, and it will keep the same formatting I put in there, which is something that's kind of nice about having a pre-made template. You don't have to automatically decide what size of font you're going to use and how the spacing will work. But it's your layout, and you're going to want to tweak some things. As you start typing your words, you may see that you have different spacing than I had, or maybe you don't have as much to say as I did, or maybe you have a lot more. So there might be some times you'll make some adjustments. You may want to make the text a little smaller. I wouldn't go a lot smaller. You may want to make it a little bigger. And as we get into some of these tips down the road, I'll tell you sort of the size range that I work with. But for now, I just want to kind of show you some of the ways that as you're typing your text in these text boxes, and this works with all my fonts, that you can make a few adjustments. So fill the space the best you can, and you're going to look at it and decide, okay, is that something I'm happy with? Am I happy with that font choice? Am I happy with the way it's positioned? You can, sorry, it's a little hard to do all this and talk at the same time, but you can choose to keep it left justified if you look down here at the bottom, or you can center it. You could right justify it. That doesn't always look as good, so you have to be kind of choosy about that. But you, like I said, it's your layout. You get to choose, and you get to work within this setup that I have for you. Now you can choose different fonts. You can see I have a lot of fonts. I'm a designer. I pay for a lot of fonts that are commercial use so that I can put them into my designs. But it can get a little overwhelming. So I have a few fonts that I love. This Glacial Indifference is one of my favorites. I chose that. Now that doesn't fill the space quite as nice. So I'm going to change the size of it. Now that cuts off a little bit. Now you don't have to only go with the choices that pop up with the arrow, the 14 or the 16. You could type in 15 and see, and that is just perfect, I think. So I could use that same font and that same sizing on my other boxes to keep it consistent. Now, if you wanted to have a really eclectic look, you could do different fonts in each of these boxes. But I find that it's really a nice, clean design to keep the same font throughout the layout. Okay, now you can see how my layout turned out. And this was a fun one. I just kept the white background and put different summer photos. I really wanted a summer vibe with this, and my summer might look different than yours. For me, summer is playing games with my son. We build Lego sets, shaved ice. Oh, yum. I hope we can have some this summer. We never got any last summer. And then, of course, I have to take pictures of flowers and food. Those are some of my favorites. Now, if you remember when I was showing you just a minute ago in the workspace, when I saw what my settings were, I just made a little screenshot of these so you can see. So I have a 14-point size, and leading is 18-point. We're going to get to that in just a minute. Honestly, I rarely go below a 12 on these, and I'll cover more about that in a little bit. But I find that 14 is often a nice size, and I'll work just within a few points of that. Here's a layout my daughter created, and she changed the font in that she did not use Photoshop Elements. She used Procreate on her iPad, and she did not have that font installed, so she chose her own. Of course, this is her cute dog that's having the best summer a dog could ever have. And so I asked her what her settings were, and she showed me her screenshot. This is the font that she chose that came installed with Procreate, and this is the size that she chose. She also chose a 14. So this layout and this text, that gives you a basic idea of how to use text that already comes on my templates. Now, that's not always going to be how you scrap. Sometimes you may be making your own page from scratch. Sometimes you may want to redo some of the text, or you may have other items that you need to put text on. So I'm going to go over that. Now, one of the big things to understand about text is leading. And That is a typography term, and it talks about the distance between the lines of text. So it's pronounced leading, like sledding, and the name actually comes from a time when typesetting was done by hand and pieces of lead were used to separate the lines. So that helps you remember. A lot of people look at that and say leading because, it's spelled the same way. But if you need to remember how it's pronounced, think about that they used actual pieces of lead. So it's that space between the lines right here. Another important term to understand is tracking. And that talks about the increase or decrease of horizontal spacing. And I'll show you that in just a minute. This is most often used to just kind of adjust and fine-tune overall spacing. And it's a really handy little thing to know about. When your type is really small, you may really want to increase your tracking. It makes it easier to read. Okay, if you visited my blog or my Instagram, you know I have a habit of doing what I call roundup each month. And this is just a page from my April roundup. It's where I include bits of news. I've been tracking the coronavirus, obviously, over the last year. I include random pictures from our month, and I always use my month cards to document what we've been doing. So you can find these in my shop, and they're different cards, and I have a few other types too, where you can fill in the blanks on the lines. These are going to be really good to use to show you how I handle leading and tracking and font size. So when I open up this card, I'm going to use my text tool, and I'll draw a text box just using my cursor. I don't have to worry about it being perfect. I can do some adjusting. And I love this Myriad Pro font. That's something that I started using a few years ago on my roundup layouts, so I've tried to stay consistent with that. There certainly is no reason you have to use that particular font. It's just one I chose and that I like. So I'm going to go ahead and type in some of the things that we watched throughout the month. We've been getting caught up on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It wasn't something we ever watched while it was on TV. We've been watching it on the Peacock app. And we always have just a couple of shows that we rotate between, some with our son and some just me and my husband. And I like to keep track of these. This is part of our everyday life, especially over the last year. I have to say we've watched a lot of TV. And that has been something that's been fun for our family. I didn't used to watch that much TV. So you can see as I type it, my spacing is a little odd. I like the size of the font. The size of the font's only a 12, but on this card I feel okay about it, but I feel like I need to do something different with the tracking. Now if I just take, you saw I just went to a -5, so I just changed it just a hair, and now these all fit because it's like squishing the font together just a little bit. I wouldn't do it a lot or then it's hard to read. But it's a great way to fit something into a defined space that you need to use. Now you can see I already had my leading set at 20 points, but that's actually not going to quite work with these lines. So I'm going to type in a little bit more about the shows that we watched. And I'm going to kind of adjust where that lays on the line. And there's a little bit of fiddling that happens with this, and that's okay. You get the hang of it, and it becomes really easy. So we watched a lot of Utah Jazz games. Now you can see that's typing a little too far down on that line, and the line above it, the text is above the line. So I need to play with the leading. I need to play with how much space is between those two lines. Now that looks pretty good. I'm going to still type a little more and see what happens when I go to the next line. And that will maybe even give me a better idea on what I need to do. Now, it's not often that you'll be typing on pre-designed lines like this, but there are times where you will. I love journaling cards that are ruled like school papers. I love these types of cards where you can fill in the details. So it's very handy to understand how to manipulate your text a little bit to fit these spaces. So we obviously are big Utah Jazz fans and love to watch basketball. And I'm just trying to figure out, I want to fill in my space right here as much as I can. So sometimes I'll change my wording a little bit as I get looking around. Now you can see this is right on that line. This one's a little above. That one's a little even more above. So I feel like I could still do a little tweaking. I'm going to just grab it with my cursor and move it and see if I like that. And I think I'm going to change that leading. I'm going to go in and just go to one more. Oh, that's the wrong way. So now I'm going to go to a 17, and I really like how that looks. So it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but you can see that this is a little more consistent and it looks good. It looks like it's meant to be typed that way. Now I just have a few more lines to add. And so I'm going to just keep going with the other shows that we watched. And again, I'm having to kind of think about my spacing, where the sentence is going to wrap, what I want to include, and I'm realizing I can't fit the whole Late Show with Stephen Colbert on that line. So I'm going to go back and change and probably just erase clips and just type in the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. I didn't need the word clips anyway. So now I feel like I have that section filled out really well, and the spacing is nice. I'm happy with the size and the leading and the tracking. And I'll go ahead and save it. This is something when I'm typing up these cards to go on my roundup layouts, I do the card first separately, and I keep it in a TIFF format in case I realize, oh, I made a spelling error or I really wanted to change something. I can go back and change that. When I'm happy with the card and it's all finished, I will save it as a JPEG and then put it into my layout just like a picture. Okay, I'm going to show you a few of my layouts and explain what sizing and leading I used. This is one I did when I released my school days kit last, I think, August. And this is me in 1975. Yep. And I am in first grade here. No teeth, messy hair, had been playing out on the playground, cute dress that my mom made. Put together this, and as I started typing in my text, I decided that was the font I was going to use, that was the size, and it's interesting that I got that 18.1, but sometimes when you grab the edges of your text box and just move it around a little bit, sometimes you can even end up with that. That's how close you can dial that in. Here's one of my son when he was 2. There's the font that I used. I wanted a really clean looking font. Most of the layout is really about the journaling. That's what this page's focus is. You can see that I adjusted my tracking and my leading on this quite a bit. And the reason I did that is because I wanted these margins, I wanted this all to be completely justified on both sides. And because that's a really nice clean look. It doesn't have to always be that you're journaling on white. You can journal on colors. You can journal on patterns. You just need to make sure you can still read it. If you're journaling on patterned paper, just make sure that nothing is interfering so much that you can't read the text. In this case, the paper was just sort of a fun wavy stripe, and it's totally fine for reading. This is the font I use, the size, and the leading. I always pay attention to my settings. Okay, here's another one where I journaled right on the photo. And a lot of times if you're journaling on a darker background, change your text to light. This is something that's so great. It's really great that you can do this digitally. It's a lot harder to do this with a physical layout, to write on or type, especially, write on your photo in a light color. So I love this. You can work around elements of your photo just by tabbing in your lines, and it kind of creates a shape. Lots of leading on this one because this font is very condensed. It was very close together until I increased the leading. I have a blog post that you may want to go check out. It's one that I wrote back in, I think, 2020, and it's about how to, excuse me, that just went forward. And it's about how to figure out your text size for scrapbook layouts. I'm going to share some of the tips here, but if you're interested in it, you may want to look that up on my blog. I will put a link to it in the comments. And the first thing to figure out, and the most important thing to figure out, is what size are you going to print the page? If you're going to print it as a 12 by 12, it's okay if your font choice is a little smaller. If you're going to print it out as a 6 by 6, then you probably better be really careful what size font you're using, because you're essentially shrinking it all down. Now, I love 10 by 10 prints. Those are my favorite. I print out in 10 by 10 photo books. I will do a tutorial about that someday, I promise. But for now, here's a picture of one of my photo books, and you can see I did quite big print on this, but that's a lot of the focus of this page, and I wanted it to be easy to read. Here's a little trick I use. Because I like 10 by 10 layouts, I can get a pretty good idea of what my layout will look like if I print it on a standard size piece of paper, because the paper is 8.5 by 11. Now, it won't be exact, but you can, if you print out your square on an 8.5 by 11, you'll get a pretty good idea. It'll be a little smaller than what your layout would be, but if you can still read it, you know you're going to be okay. And I just want to make a comment that if you are younger, trust me on this, go bigger. Because when I was digital scrapbooking in my 30s, I used to use pretty small print. And I remember showing a relative one of my books one day, and she said, "This is really hard for me to read." And I was kind of surprised. Well, I am now of the age where I have to wear the bifocals to read, and it is a real thing. And I don't want to, as I get even older, to not be able to read my own journaling. So always err on the side of bigger. It's not going to be a problem if you do that. Here's a little fun trick. If you have a tablet, like this is a big size iPad Pro, the 12.9. So you can see what your layout looks like on that. Hold it up to what you usually print out, whether it's an 8 by 8 or a 12 by 12. Find a way to measure against it. And then as you look, you can even do this with your computer screen, your laptop screen, a tablet, whatever you can use to view your layouts. It's kind of a trick without having to print it out, that you can figure out how your layout is going to look, if the size, if it's readable. Now, obviously, this is a little smaller than what it was going to print out, but it gave me a good idea. When I looked at it, I had to say, okay, that's a card with some really small print. Can I still read that? And I could. So those are some fun tips for you. Now, I also blog about font choices. I'm starting to put together a series. I'm going to be doing more. I have 2 so far, and these have been really popular posts where I show my favorite fonts, because I've studied fonts for years now, And I always look, when I see a layout I like, I always make a note of what the font was, and then I check that out. Now, all of these are actually free to download. And I have all of the links on my blog, so I will put this in the comments as well. But I love, you can tell by my layouts, I love these really basic, clean looking journaling fonts. Now that's okay if you like a different style, but I want to show you this tip that I used on the side. I opened a document in Word. You can do it in Photoshop or wherever you want to use. And I just typed out a block of text, copied it over and over, and then I changed each one to these different fonts. And it's really a great little tool to have to say, okay, what do I like? Like that Courier Prime is so great when you want sort of a typed feel to it, like you got out your typewriter. That Open Sans is just really nice and clean. There's nothing that's going to distract you about that. So take a look at what the fonts look like. Study them. See how their spacing is. See how their leading works out. All of these have the same settings. These are all 14 point with 18 point leading. Just very basic. Okay, the legible and free script font post was a fun one to do because you don't always want just a really basic font, especially if you're working on titles. These are some of my favorites, but you can see it would be awfully hard to read a whole page of text in these. I wouldn't tell a big story this way. I'd use it for highlights, for titles. These can be fun to put right on top of a photo and give it a really decorative look. But be wise when you're using more decorative fonts. I am working currently on a font post all about handwritten fonts, so stay tuned for that. Be sure that you are reading my blog. You can even subscribe to it by email if that's easier for you too. Okay, fonts are functional. Fonts are a design choice. It's okay to have fun with fonts. It's okay to not worry too much about them. Just make sure that they don't detract from the story you're trying to tell. You want them to enhance your story. You want to invite the reader to look at your story and read about what you experienced. Your words are telling the story, so make sure that you can read it. Make sure your fonts are big enough and that they're clear enough that you can always enjoy the stories that they tell. I'm so glad that you came here to watch this tutorial. I hope you'll subscribe and like the tutorial and check out my other ones. Thank you so much.